You know, there's oftentimes in history classes we deal with great ideas or great events on the national scale or the state scale, but oftentimes politics is about who can do what for whom. And that's what this story is really about. Following World War II, the federal government, the Corps of Engineers, decided to build a dam on the Etowah River that created Lake Allatoona. And as we all know, Lake Allatoona is a pretty gigantic artificial lake, and it spread all the way up to the outskirts of Acworth. And the local people in Acworth were excited about the idea of becoming of a lake. They saw a lot of possibilities for recreation, not to mention the purposes for putting a dam on the Etowah River with flood control and what have you. But the problem was it was going to be mud flats around here, and you can just imagine how unsightly that would be to have mud flats and mosquito problems and what have you right here in Acworth. And so when they had the first public hearing on Lake Allatoona, what became Lake Allatoona, in 1946 down in Atlanta, you know, the Corps of Engineers invited anybody that wanted to come and comment. And among those who commented were Fred Keenel, who was head of the Planning Commission in Acworth at that time, and Vera Autry, the wife of a banker who really spoke for the women of Acworth. And they really all said the same thing, and that is that we want a second dam, a secondary dam that would create a permanent lake in Acworth. And it took a whole lot of politicking to make that come about. And the congressman at the time was named Henderson Lanham, and he really wasn't from Cobb County. The district ran all the way to the Tennessee line. But he worked hard to make it happen, and a lot of people did lobbying for it. And so eventually, the Corps of Engineers agreed to build a secondary dam. By July 1950, a 48-foot concrete dam was completed that made it possible to create Lake Acworth. And then the next part of the story is in 1950, Herman Talmadge was running for re-election as governor. And he came into Acworth and he sat down with a lot of the local leaders and he just asked them, what do people in Acworth want? And I've heard this tale, first we heard it from Harold Willingham, who was a state senator at the time from Marietta. His story was that he and John Heck, who was the commissioner at that time, met with Talmadge, and they said, what we want's a beach. And apparently other people were saying the same thing. It was like a full court press of how they all told Talmadge that what we want is support for creating a beach. And so what Talmadge said is, I think it's a good idea. I'll pledge $25,000 to make it happen. Well, even back then, $25,000 wasn't quite enough to make it happen, but Harold Willingham was the chair of the Senate Finance Committee at that time. And the bill actually began in the House. Talmadge put it in his budget after he'd gotten elected with the support of people of Acworth. But when it got to the Senate, Willingham upped the amount to $50,000 for 1951, and they were doing two-year budgets at that time, another $50,000 for the next year for 52. So he put $100,000 into what was going to eventually pass. And maybe one of the last parts of the story is that John Heck, the commissioner, was a fervent Talmadge man, fervent Talmadge supporter, and he said, you'll never get away with this. So Willingham bet Heck a Stetson hat that they would get $100,000. And so they went to visit Talmadge, and Talmadge said, well, the money's in the budget, isn't it? And they didn't, all they said is, yes, sir, it's in the budget. And Talmadge said, well, let's go for it. And so they went for it, and without Talmadge's realizing it, he ended up supporting a $100,000 project. So that's a true story of local politics, and maybe a good example of how you can get things done if you have a good idea and you're in the game, where you can have some influence on people that can get things done.